On the 1st of December 2022, India will assume the presidency of the G20, or Group of 20 Nations. And in 2023, the G20 summit will be held in India for the first time. The G20 is the world's most influential economic multilateral forum. It is the global agenda-setting body that guides international financial institutions and develops and enforces rules of global economic governance. Given that India's G20 presidency would be a watershed moment in our history, in the coming months, Diplomatic Dispatch will be bringing you a series of dispatches on its various dimensions, starting with this curtain raiser today. The G20 was formed in 1999 in the wake of the Asian financial crisis to unite finance ministers and central bankers from 20 of the world's largest established and emerging economies, from Australia to India to the United States, in a common quest for global economic stability. A decade later, in the wake of the global financial crisis of 2007-8, the United States, which held the G20 presidency in 2008, elevated the meeting of the finance ministers and central bank governors to heads of state, resulting in the first G20 summit. The first three summits in Washington, D.C., London and Pittsburgh set the scene for some of the most durable global economic reforms in the last 60 years, such as blacklisting states in an effort to tackle tax evasion and avoidance, provisioning stricter controls on hedge funds and rating agencies, making the Financial Stability Board an effective supervisory and watchdog body for the global financial system, proposing stricter regulations for banks, and helping avert a shift to protectionism in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis. Since then, the G20 has reinvented itself by widening its agenda to include issues such as climate change, health, food security and nutrition, tourism, digital economy, education, employment, energy, migration, anti-corruption, empowerment, and meeting the Sustainable Development Goals. The importance of the G20 can be gauged from the fact that collectively its member nations account for 85% of global GDP, 75% of international trade, and 2/3 of the world's population. The G20 does not have a permanent secretariat or headquarters. Instead, the G20 president is responsible for bringing together the G20 agenda in consultation with other members and in response to developments in the global economy. The presidency of the G20 rotates every year among members, and the country holding the presidency, together with the previous and next presidency holder, form the Troika to ensure continuity of the G20 agenda. Italy, Indonesia, and India are the Troika countries right now. The G20's agenda is driven through two channels: the financial track and the Sherpa track. The financial channel, which consists of finance ministers and central bank governors from all G20 members, specifically addresses a number of issues related to the financial sector. The Sherpa track addresses other issues that are outside the financial sector, as well as preparing various documents to be discussed at the summit. Therefore, Sherpas are generally appointed directly by the heads of government of the member countries and are seen as their personal representatives at various G20 meetings. To learn more about India's upcoming presidency, I am privileged to have with me in the studio India's Sherpa to the G20, Mr. Amitabh Kant. Ever since joining the Indian Administrative Service in 1980, Mr. Kant has been a trailblazer. He was a key driver of Make in India, Startup India, Incredible India, and God's Own Country initiatives, which positioned and branded India and Kerala state as leading manufacturing and tourism destinations. Till June this year, he was CEO of Niti Aayog, tasked with catalyzing India's development process and enhancing cooperative federalism. Welcome to Diplomatic Dispatch, Mr. Kant.
Thank you.
It's a great pleasure to have you on the show.
My pleasure.
Now, you just heard me explaining the importance of the G20. But what is India's importance to the G20? What do we bring to the table?
Because it's very important that to understand that India has been growing rapidly. It's a very key player in the global economy. We'll soon be amongst the third largest economies in the world. We've done several transformational things from carrying out very vast amount of digitization, which no other country in the world. Our digital payments are today more than what United States and China do together. We've carried out a huge amount of infrastructure. We've pushed the limits as far as a range of new initiatives on electrification, on providing water to the community. And there's several lessons from India's growth story, which is critical. It's important also to understand that G20 actually comprises of almost about 85% of the global GDP. It comprises about 75% of the global trade, and almost about 70% of the global population. So India brings a lot to the table. India is a very critical player in the global economy. It will be very difficult for the world to grow. We are the most rapidly growing economy today in the world. The IMF has said that India will grow at about 7.4%. And that means that we are the fastest growing large economy in the world. Global growth is in many, many ways being driven by India. And therefore, we need to accelerate. The challenge before the world today is growth with sustainability. It will be very difficult for the world to grow without India. It will be very difficult for the world to grow without India becoming a sustainable nation. And therefore, if climate adaptation and mitigation has to be the heart of growth, then India will have to be the center stage of it.
Following on from this, now at a time when the world economy is facing an increasingly gloomy and uncertain outlook, what is the G20 doing to promote global growth?
So, because my view is that there are recessionary pressures right now. There's a huge challenge. The world has never faced these kind of challenges. The Russia-Ukraine war, the China-Taiwan crisis, global supply chains are in a state of flux. Global trade, which had enabled the world economy to grow and to lift vast segments of our population above poverty line, that has slowed down now. And you will see soon that global debt has slowed down. Without global debt, it will be impossible for countries to grow rapidly. And in the midst of all this, you have the huge challenge of growing with sustainability, and therefore climate change and the targets, vast targets for net zero by 2050, and in India's case by 2070, which I feel is a huge opportunity and not a challenge, are really the key issues before the world. The challenge is really to bring a consensus to grow rapidly, and this would really mean that many of the institutions, many of the developmental financial institutions, which were actually designed for the post-World War II period, in the post-Bretton Woods period, all of them need to radically be re-altered and redesigned for a post-COVID and a post-climate world era. So you need new methodologies of financing, you need first loss guarantees, you need blended finance, you need a large amount of money to flow on the back of which, at low interest rates, on the back of which many countries like India are able to grow with sustainability in the future. And that is really the key. Multilateralism will have to be at the heart of growth in the future.
I'm glad you mentioned the restructuring of global institutions, because the formation of the G20 was a direct response to the failure of the G7 in finding solutions to the problems of the global economy at that time. Now, both the G7 and the UN Security Council are, in a sense, reminders of the world order which prevailed immediately after the Second World War. The G20, on the other hand, is a unique institution where developed and developing countries have equal stature. So do you see the G20 as the right template for this multipolar world that you spoke about?
Yeah. Because it's very important to understand that there are several issues which can be dealt with at the level of UN Security Council, UN General Assembly. There are some issues which can be tackled at the G7 level. But when the East Asian financial crisis arose, the G7s of the world realized that it was impossible to tackle this financial crisis without involving other countries of the world. And that's how G7 was then expanded to G20. And it enabled, it's the only forum in the world where you have both developed and developing world together. And that is why this, to my mind, G20 is the most significant and the most critical institution in the world today. And if there is challenges of economic, social order, and to my mind, those are key challenges of growth, of accelerating the pace of SDG goals, of climate change, of using many of these developmental financial institutions through whom work has to be delivered by G20, all of them are actually on the table. It's not just the G20. There are many other invitee countries. There are 41 institutions. They're all the developmental financial institutions of the world there, they're assembled on the high table. So this is leadership of the world at its highest level. And if this leadership is able to arrive at a consensus and drive growth and change, it is the most formidable collection of leaders who can bring change in the world. And therefore, there is no other forum in the world which can accelerate the pace of growth, which can accelerate sustainability, which can accelerate trade, which can ensure that vast segments of people rise above poverty line. There is no other institution in the world other than G20. The UN is too large, too unwieldy. G7 is too elitist. G20 covers both the developed and the developing world.
Now, you recently traveled to Indonesia, which will be hosting the G20 this year. How is their presidency shaping up? And what are the kind of themes and issues that they are going to highlight during their presidency?
So Indonesia has worked very hard, and I must compliment them, despite all the challenges of the Russia-Ukraine war. There have been challenges because the G7, particularly the European countries, for them, the war is almost like an existential threat. And therefore, they find it very difficult to arrive at a consensus at this particular point of time. But Indonesia has worked very, very hard, I must say. The challenge about G20 is really doing a lot of hard work beforehand. It's about preparing your issue notes. It's about doing work behind the scenes. It's about interacting with a lot of Sherpas, a lot of leaders, arriving at consensus beforehand, and so that then you can prepare your zero notes, which can then find a way out into the leadership communique. And therefore, you must be very, very clear of what you want to achieve right in the end. Your target of what you want to achieve has to be absolutely crystal clear, that these are 5 or 6 big ticket things I'm going to crack. Now, in the case of Indonesia, they may have done that, but they're finding it really difficult because of the Russia-Ukraine war and the ability to arrive at a consensus. So Indonesia has done everything possible, They've put their best act together. They're using this as a great opportunity to do this. But I only wish, all of us wish, that Indonesia succeeds, that it comes out with communique at the end of it all, at the leadership conference when they do this in November. And because that will then set the benchmark for India to succeed and subsequently for Brazil to succeed, because this is the first time that 3 years in a row there are 3 emerging countries, Indonesia, India and Brazil. So all of us are dependent on each other to succeed. So we really wish Indonesia all the best, and we really want them to succeed.
Now, as a founding member of the G20, India has used the platform to raise issues of vital importance and those that impact on the most vulnerable around the world. So what kind of topics will India seek to highlight during its presidency?
So, because this is a very, very important question, because, it's important to understand the G20 doesn't have a permanent secretariat. It moves every year with the presidency, and it's very important that when India has the presidency, India uses this opportunity to really push the Indian narrative. And India has done some extraordinary things in the past. India's leadership, political leadership, led by the Prime Minister, has done some extraordinary things as far as individual identity, digital identity is concerned, the payment is concerned, the vaccination story is concerned, the COVID is concerned, a whole range of digital public goods is concerned. Now, these are unique stories, and these need to be taken across in the world as almost like a cloud in the box, which can then be told to the rest of the world that instead of creating infrastructure, we are here digitally to enable people to transform their lives. It's about making a huge impact on education, health, literacy, nutrition, all these areas digitally. And therefore, that's a huge opportunity. Secondly, India is the only country in the world which actually achieved its NDC targets, which it committed to in Paris. Out of all the G20 countries, we are the only country which achieved its target 9 years ahead of schedule. We achieved over 110 gigawatt of renewable energy. Now the challenge is to use renewable energy, crack water, produce green hydrogen. And that's a huge, huge opportunity for the future. And I think there's consensus around the world that we have to move away from fossil fuel into a greener, sustainable world. And green hydrogen really provides that massive opportunity. So the Prime Minister has already announced a green hydrogen mission. He has already announced in his Independence Day speech that India will be fossil fuel free by 2047. And therefore, we need to get everybody around on the table. It's about building consensus. And then thirdly, I think there's a huge, huge opportunity as far as G20 is concerned to accelerate the pace of SDG. And really, the world is lagging behind, and this is the midway point for 2030. So there's a huge, huge opportunity to push for greater levels of acceleration of SDG goals. But there's a huge opportunity on cleaning up the oceans, pushing for the blue economy. All these are vast areas for the future. So India wants to leave behind a huge narrative. India wants to use this opportunity to really push development globally and really push the digitization of the world to transform lives and see that we use the opportunity of G20 to make a difference to the lives of citizens across the world.
Now, the 2008 financial crisis cemented the G20's reputation as the premier crisis management and coordination body. But it was found wanting during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, India is the world's largest producer of vaccines and has been championing vaccine equity. How can the G20 advance the cause of global vaccine access and resilient health infrastructure, which is now so important?
Yeah. So this is a very major challenge in the world because COVID is not the last crisis which is going to hit the world. There will be many other health pandemics which will impact the world in the future. This is probably the beginning of it all, and I don't want to sound pessimistic about this, but the COVID patient in one part of the world is a threat to every part of the world, and therefore this requires a global response, and it requires everybody to work together to ensure that vaccination is made available across the world. Similarly, you will have the scenario of monkeypox right now, which is spreading, and we need to take concerted action and so on, and many other actions. So I think, to my mind, much like Gavi was set up, and which needs to be accelerated and consensus needs to be arrived at in many of these issues, but to my mind, health will be a very critical issue. Secondly, digitization of health will be a very key issue. And thirdly, arriving at a consensus to have a global fund which will then enable vaccines to be developed for major emergency crises will be a very key thing. But to my mind, digitization of health will be really transformational, and that will have to play a very critical role.
Now, another area that India excels in is in technology and services. We have created some world-beating digital public goods, which you mentioned, like the Aadhaar system, India Stack, Unified Payments Interface, and the CoWIN platform. Is our G20 presidency also an opportunity to take these open source digital public goods global?
Yeah. So this is a massive opportunity, and my view is that while some countries across the world have used their financial muscle to push for infrastructure in other parts of the world, which has led to debt crisis. In India's case, India has some very, very unique things on identification, on payment. It has pushed a lot on a range of other areas, including now on e-commerce through the ONDC platform,
yes, exactly.
Open Network Platform. And these are all open source. They are all interoperable. And therefore, what India has created is the digital public infrastructure layer on the top of which we've allowed private sector to innovate. So India is the only country in the world where you see PhonePe competing with Google Pay, and together they account for about 80% of the market share. This is the only place where Ola competes with Uber and beats them to it. So this is a huge layer of digital public infrastructure on the which innovation comes in on top of it. And this, if you have to make a difference to the lives of people in terms of improving education, health in the future, how do you improve learning outcomes? How do you improve health outcomes? And there are many Indian startups today, and we have over about 105 unicorns. And these startups, when we started the Startup India movement, there were just about 150 odd startups. Today we have 75,000 startups. Now these startups, many of them are working using this digital platform. They've become unicorns because they use the digital public infrastructure to ride. Now look at what has happened. I mean, we had the unified payment interface which enabled payments to take place. But then you have a range of other lenders. You have MobiKwik, you have Lending Card, you have Pine Labs, all using digital data to do lending, which is cashless, paperless, totally cashless, paperless lending. And then you have another set of startups. You look at Zerodha, you look at Upstock, all of them are actually helping in wealth management, personal wealth creation, all digital, paperless, cashless, zero transaction fee. And then you have a set of new startups which are doing insurance, end-to-end underwriting. Look at ACO, look at Digit Insurance. All of them are digital. I could never imagine in my life that you would be ending up doing wealth creation, you would end up doing insurance, you would do lending, which will all be cashless, paperless. You know, many years back when I was working in Kerala in the fisheries sector, my job was to transform the lives of traditional fishermen. And I gave outboard motors, we gave fishing nets, new fishing nets, we gave new outboard motors and crafts, new fiberglass crafts. But opening their bank accounts was a nightmare. It used to take us 8 to 9 months for know your customer and open their bank account.
Because they probably did not have the relevant documents.
Yeah, chasing bank managers. And today you open a bank account in less than a minute. So within my last 15 years of my career, I have seen this transformation of opening a bank account from 9 months to less than a minute. That has been the digital transformation of India.
Now the G20 also has various engagement groups, such as the Business 20, Civil 20, Labour 20, Science 20, Think 20, Women 20, Youth 20. How important is it to make all these groups stakeholders in the G20 agenda?
No, it's very, very important because G20 is a very vast movement from across the world. Much of the communique that is finally issued at the leaders level, many of the inputs come from working groups. Many very great inputs come in from the engagement groups. And engagement groups are very critical because this is a huge opportunity for engagements of civil society, for engagement of startups, for engagement of business leaders. There can be no growth in the world at the government level. It's the private businesses which truly drive growth. And therefore, government, as the Prime Minister has repeatedly said, has to act as a facilitator and catalyst in the private businesses which need to drive this. And therefore, it's very, very critical, very important that we use this opportunity of engagement groups of community, young leaders, women, parliamentarians, everybody together to create this unique experience of India. And therefore, this is an opportunity to really bring out the huge importance and significance of not merely your hard power, but also your soft power. And you will see over about 100,000 visitors during this period. So G20, over about 250 odd meetings spread out across, about 190 working groups and engagement groups meeting, but there'll be many, many more meetings. So you have about 250 meetings across the length and breadth of India. Now, how do you create a unique Indian experience from the point of arrival to the point of departure that every person who comes to India goes back mentally rejuvenated and spiritually invigorated and really, spiritually invigorated and physically elevated as an Indian? So the challenge is really to send back about 100,000 people totally Indian when they go back and they become the brand ambassadors of India. Their Atma should all be Indian.
Now these 250 meetings, where all will they be held in India? And how's the main summit venue shaping up?
So about 190 odd official meetings. Balance will be many, many more meetings. Now the 190 official meetings are spread across the Prime Minister is very clear that this is an opportunity to really involve states. This is also an opportunity for us to clean up our municipalities, to clean up our roads, to really make a huge impact on the states. And therefore, the Prime Minister has desired that these meetings should be held in every single state of India, every single union territory.
So full Bharat Darshan.
Full Bharat. So many meetings are being held in different states of India. So you will have meetings from across the length and breadth of India taking place. And that, to my mind, will be a huge, huge opportunity for every Indian state. And this is also an opportunity for, as the Prime Minister told the Chief Ministers, that we should use this opportunity to bring out the best talent in their states through competition. Every district should compete, every state should compete, so that we bring out the best talent culturally and really project the best of India during this period.
Now, organizing the summit, which will bring together leaders from the world's 20 most important economies, and organizing these 190 plus 60 other meetings in the run-up to the summit is going to be a mammoth task. So what kind of infrastructure is being put in place to ensure that everything goes smoothly?
So because great amount of work has been done on this, the cabinet had earlier decided that there will be a G20 secretariat, which has now been put in place at the Sushma Swaraj Bhavan in New Delhi. This secretariat is manned by people from across many ministries. So it's a pan-Indian kind of secretariat, pan-services, inter-ministerial services kind of secretariat. It is doing all the hard work to ensure all the detailing is being done. And in addition to all this, you have all the states working with us. We'll work in partnership with a whole range of players. We'll try and professionalize everything possible so as to ensure that we send back people with the best possible Indian experience. And we ensure that actually there are two components of this, to my mind. One is the intellectual component, which is the content creation, which is about really ensuring that your issue notes, zero paper, all that hard work is going on. And on the other side is really about logistics, it's about transportation, it's about branding. That is a separate work which is going on. But in addition to all this, we also need to work with a lot of experts, a lot of knowledge partners, because you need to prepare the best possible issue notes. You need to prepare issue notes which are of highly global quality to be able to succeed. And that is the work which is presently going on.
So what kind of a legacy would India want to leave behind once it chairs the G20, when its presidency is done?
So, firstly, I must say that India is a very, very powerful standing in the world. The Prime Minister carries a lot of huge credibility as a leader. And therefore, everybody expects India to succeed. Everybody wants India to succeed. Everybody desires that G20 must be a remarkable success story when it comes to India. And India can play a very critical and significant role because of its very close proximity with many countries in the world. And therefore, India will have this huge advantage of firstly bringing about a consensus of different countries together, putting them on table, and ensuring that we are able to get every single country together and then accelerate the pace of the various decisions, including SDG, including climate change, including digital transformation, and ensuring that G20 becomes the key vehicle to accelerate the pace of growth, accelerate the pace of sustainability in the world, and accelerate the pace of lifting people above poverty line in the world. That is India's challenge, and India will definitely succeed in it.
Thank you, Mr. Kant, for explaining so lucidly to our viewers how India is approaching its G20 presidency. As a major developing economy, India has a vital stake in the stability of the international economic and financial system. That is why India's upcoming presidency of the G20 is an opportunity to work towards an equitable, inclusive and sustainable global recovery which benefits the people directly, as well as restore the world's faith in multilateralism. That is all I have for you in this edition of Diplomatic Dispatch. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.